If you're not familiar with District Vision, they are under the category of the Mavericks. We've brought them here because they have a outstanding eyewear and accessories brand about running that also intersects with meditation. And I particularly wanted to talk to them today because they have done something very difficult, which is start a new sports brand that I think has been very visually impactful and also and has produced really exceptional technically performing products, and they've done it in a very natural and slow way, and I thought they would be an interesting addition to the big four that we always think about when we talk about sports and fashion. So I also am interested in their background in fashion, and I met them maybe over a decade ago when they were working in high fashion. I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about that, and we can see how we got to where we are. So Max, I met you when you were at Saint Laurent. Yeah.
Almost,
yes. Exactly. It was Eddie. And before that, I think you have an even longer history in fashion. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I stumbled into fashion at a very young age. I was 13, I think, when I was asked to walk in some of Edie's Timane's runway shows. The career didn't last very long, but it got my foot in the door and met a lot of amazing people, and eventually convinced someone to give me an internship and slowly work my way up, and landed in New York. I guess Tom and we met when we were 17, and then landed in New York at the same time. Do you want to say?
And Tom, you have a background in fashion as well.
Yes. At the same time, Max was at Saint Laurent, was at Acne in Stockholm. So very different thing to a French fashion house. When you work in a country that's only 10 million people, you have this amazing thing where you have to appeal to the daughter, the mom, and the grandma. And that was the fascinating thing about Sweden. Obviously today it's more of a global brand, but it was a very special time at that company where it was just evolving into something and into the ideas that we know today.
And about a decade ago, I was talking to you, and you seemed very burned out on the pace of high fashion, on the world of high fashion. At that point, you were orchestrating shows, and it was at about the highest level of pressure one could get to, I think, in this industry. And I remember one day we sat down and you said, "We're getting out of this, and we're starting a running brand." And I thought, this was 10 years ago. The athleisure moment had not happened, and I remember thinking perhaps it wouldn't succeed, but it has.
I remember thinking the same.
Yeah. So I know that running for you was about community, and can you talk a little bit about why running and what drove you to that particular case?
Yeah, I mean, even before that, to be honest, I mean, the great thing when I was working at the time in Sweden was we all got too much responsibility at a young age. So I remember sitting there one Wednesday morning, we had closed the season, and the purchasing manager or whatever was ordering the fabrics. And usually those fabrics are distributed to the factories, right? So they were supposed to go out there, fast forward 3 days, I walk into the office, and the 5 tons of cotton is in the lobby of the office. The following few days, a book was placed on our desk at Acne by the creative director at the time, and it was a book by David Lynch called Catching the Big Fish, I think, right? And it talks about his Transcendental Meditation practice. So that was my first experience of taking kind of the idea of the mind and taking that into the professional setting. And then fast forward a few years, Max and I were back in New York, and there was this fantastic moment in time where running culture was intersecting with a broader cultural phenomenon. We were at the time, as you might remember, very ashamed of our background in fashion. But you had this DIY mentality where you had kids who, were taking products like a Rick Owens vest. They were cutting it because it was great for running, because it had a loose fit. And so you had this testing process in product development in running at the time, and you had a lot of people exploring running as a self-expression, kind of similar to skating. We just happened to be in a really lucky position that 2 years prior, Max had taken up meditation, and we started teaching meditation to runners with no product. So I understand why you're saying that you didn't think it would succeed, because we didn't have any product at the beginning.
Yeah, Max, you actually didn't develop clothing first. You set about finding a way into this category through eyewear. Why was that your way in?
Good question. Yeah. So the way it started is literally by teaching meditation, everything that I was picking up on meditation retreats and yoga teacher trainings to a group of runners that Tom was preparing for marathons with. And it was just this pivotal moment in time where they were questioning everything. They were questioning all aspects of what they were wearing, the shoes, the technology in the shoes, the nutrition, the fueling, the most minute details in the clothing. And we just thought to ourselves, it's crazy that this field is still dominated by a handful of brands. It's in some ways obvious, because it felt like they had such a firm handle on the market. And in another way, there was such an obvious void in many of the categories. And eyewear in particular, Tom and I have always been obsessed with well-made Japanese eyewear. So we looked around, and at the time we were just running with our optical frames, and we asked ourselves, why is no one making great sports eyewear? Oakley was amazing in the 90s, but then they got swallowed up, like so many other eyewear brands. They got swallowed up by one of the big groups, and over time the quality and innovation level deteriorates. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. So
was also a really unique moment in time where this DIY approach in sport, historically, Nike take the waffle iron and put the sole of the shoe on the waffle iron to make the original Nike shoe. Patagonia was an ironmonger. You have this DIY in making things, and District Vision was just so lucky, because when we started was the advent of 3D printing. So we could prototype in New York, we could print 15 frames, 25 frames, 30 frames, and we didn't have to start with a product that existed already. We could 3D print and test. So we were also products of that time, which is really lucky. So our starting point maybe was a bit less obvious, maybe you could say.
And then how did you know that you'd stumbled on the right prototype? Were you using it among your community of runners?
We were using it, we were using it amongst a small group of runners. And I remember we went to Hawaii to run the marathon. It's a beautiful marathon if you want to run it. It's in December. It's a great excuse to go. And we met our Japanese production partner there, and the engineers are all marathon runners. And we ran the race together, and then we finished the race. And Japanese can be quite minimal with their words sometimes. And they said, "This is good." That was enough.
Well, a fun little side story is that we must have gone through thousands and thousands of sketches, really asking ourselves, what does sports eyewear even look like? What is it supposed to look like? What is it supposed to do? What's the weight supposed to be? What's the weight distribution supposed to be? How are the lenses supposed to be shaped? Et cetera, et cetera. So we had all these insane drawings. And I remember bringing some of those sketches to one of our advisors, old friends, Ben Gorham, who started Byredo Perfumes. And we showed him all these sketches, and he was like, well, no, have you asked yourself who's going to wear this? Making a pair of eyewear comes with huge tooling costs, huge an initial investment that can be prohibitive, and minimums and so on and so forth. So we actually went through this process of testing it on as wide a variety of face shapes as we could, on as wide a variety of runners at different levels, male, female, different ethnicities, because there's so much variety in people's faces and different facial features, to land at a frame that to us was like a performance wayfarer, essentially. So we started in a really safe space, from a design perspective at least.
I feel like you predicted the return of the Oakley wraparound gas station sunglasses that the Times wrote about a few years ago. So that is an enormous investment. How did you swing that as two independent people?
I think the gods were watching over us somehow. Every time we ran out of money, something would happen. There was a different periods. We had a creative agency, so it got to the point where, we worked with all the major sports brands, essentially ripping off ourselves and providing it to others to be able to create a cash flow cycle. And there was also a great time in New York where we had a production order coming up, and we Airbnb'd Max's apartment and he moved in with me. So we did whatever needed to get done, but we always had this desire to be independent. And for us it was important because we wanted to put the soul back into retail of selling one unit. And when you have that money that flows in this industry today, you can have that pressure that whether one unit has to be 100 units, and then you start to make decisions maybe you're less proud of. So we kind of wanted to start in that way. And the evolution, I think for us, what we always say to each other is you always underestimate what you can do in the long run and overestimate what you can do in the short run. And we definitely did that in the short run.
At what point were you able to give up the creative agency and Airbnb-ing the apartment
Still doing
to become a proper business?
2020. So for the first 5 years, we were running the agency on the side, or really running the agency full time and working on the brand at night. And then I remember, getting out of the city, New York City at the time, in 2020, thinking, okay, this is it. So let's get ready to move back to Europe. And then slowly but surely, we just started seeing the orders pick up like crazy. And like many of us, we didn't know what to do. We couldn't ship order, or we couldn't bring inventory in, and we couldn't produce new marketing. So we're, sat out in Long Island, calling up friends and putting on Instagram live tutorials, workshops, and meditation sessions.
It was also COVID. It was a special time in New York in the sense that you saw who lived there, and I'm sure maybe the same for you as well. I lived on Crosby Street. The office was on Houston and Broadway. I would go pack the e-com orders myself, print the labels. UPS refused to pick up, so would drag it to the depot on Greenwich Street. And you saw, again, it was that soulful approach to retail. You saw who needed to operate their companies and who was doing it themselves. The coffee shop on West Broadway was open. You just saw who had the soul in what they do. So it was a special time, not only for sport, but also for retail in general, where you could be yourself and you could find a unique avenue in which to operate.
And a lot of people took up running and meditation in 2020. And I think people that I had not seen recognize your brand began to post about it on Instagram. And in fact, after COVID, your brand campaigns took on a whole new energy. Can you tell me a bit about how your background in fashion and creating the kinds of imagery for high fashion clients informs what makes District Vision look a little bit different than your typical performance sports company? Because there's a very specific look to your photography, and you don't align directly with athletes because so many of them are partnered with and signed to the big companies. So how have you worked around that?
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about this. There really isn't a formula to how we do it. The one thing we knew early on is that we couldn't afford any of the big athletes that the big brands had. So our journey was always about celebrating the amateur athlete, the small everyday athlete, and finding the beauty, the glamour, the power in that. So we used photographers. We've always mostly used photographers that we knew from our days in fashion to bring a new perspective to how athleticism, how performance, sports moments were captured from early on. And it was really important to us that we stayed true to performance. I remember in the early days we didn't never shot any models. We only worked with athletes in our inner circle, and we just tried staying very close to what we felt was genuine and true to us. And to this day, I mean, we work with stylists now here and there. We work with art directors. We're starting to tap back in to our background in fashion. We try to run as far away as we could. 7-8 years ago, we're finding our way back, very much into the heart of it. But all the product we make, all the athletes we shoot are still always performance first, but we try and capture it with the lens of what feels true to us.
So talk a little bit about your community, because it is unique amongst this room. I know who you're talking about when you talk about the runners that you guys hang out with, but they were maybe former party people in New York. They were photographers. They were the kinds of people that you wouldn't typically associate with sport. And yet you've built a community around them. Like, how do you think about community building in general? And then when you go from city to city, how do you foster that community?
Yeah, I think there comes a point in everyone's life where you see the circle of life happen, and you become a parent or grandparent or a child, and you have kind of almost, you could say, like a respect for your mind, and therefore how it controls your body. So that's something that we always saw in the major cities in the world. So when we went to London or Paris or Seoul or Tokyo, next week Mexico City, there is this group of people that identify with a brand like District Vision, but they listen to a podcast like Rich Roll or Huberman, and there's this concept of self-development that is definitely prevalent, that District Vision benefits from. And I would say we are just one of the brands that sit within that psychological evolution that we see in the market in many ways.
Yeah, and an important thing to add here is that the understanding how to make people feel something viscerally, as opposed to just showing them an idea or showing them a picture, right, was always at the heart of what we did. That's how it started, right? We started teaching meditation to runners, and this program, which started off as a mindful athlete program, has been around now for 8 years, and it has now evolved into what we call a 3-step method. So this is something we've worked on with psychologists and neuroscientists and leading athletes that we've crossed paths with to turn it into an approach to running, including breath work and mindfulness instructions and so on, to give people a more mindful, a more connected, more creative approach to running. So everyone can, it was Men's Fashion Week last week, and there were seemingly endless amounts of running events. And what most brands do is they just hand out shoes and take people for a run. And what we try to do is give people an experience, a new idea of what it can feel like to move.
I had one last question, and then I want to open it up to anyone else. I know you have a collaboration with New Balance, and that it is the only shoe sold, performance shoe sold at Dover Street Market, which is a famously snobby fashion venue. How did that come about?
Weirdly enough, we were products of the last wave of fashion, we always say. We launched the brand in Colette. So for us, it was this very romantic period where it wasn't so much about social media clout, but about finding your way to certain people. And luckily, when we launched, we were in Colette, and through spending so much time in Japan, we also were lucky enough to meet the DSM team. And that process, I think, and their understanding of how long everything was taking us, I think, gave them a little bit of confidence. But this idea that we could, for the first time, control marketing, product, and distribution in sport was an interesting concept to us, and still something that I think is quite unique, that you can have performance-first product, so not lifestyle product not performance products subverted into lifestyle in a place like Dover Street, but you can have performance first product and people will come in there and get the clothing and the shoes is very unique. And the access point, our hope with that is the access point obviously just broadens the number of people that want to do things like running or meditation and stuff like that we can package in a way to the customer that maybe has been left behind, that thinks sport maybe is not for them, that it's intimidating. And that's what we say, and what we try and do when we work through this method is, how do you make someone come back and do something again when it was the hardest part of their day? When you start running, luckily there's not a mirror in front of you. I remember what it looked like when I started running, but I didn't look great. So it's that idea of keeping people coming back again and again to something that is very hard.
I'm being told we don't have time for questions, unfortunately, but thank you so much, and we really appreciate that you're coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.